Hello, peaceful soul. I'm your storyteller this evening, here to help you unwind and drift into a gentle, restful sleep. Before we begin our journey, remember to like the video and subscribe for more calming bedtime tales. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And if there's a story you'd love to hear next, I'd be happy to bring it to life. My name is Connor Blake, and for the past 7 years, I've been an independent comic book artist and illustrator. My days are spent bringing worlds to life on paper and screen, creating characters, crafting narratives, and pouring my imagination onto the page. It's a job that requires intense focus, a vivid imagination, and a deep connection to your own inner world. I thrive on creativity, on the freedom of artistic expression, and the solitude of my studio. I thought I understood the boundaries between imagination and reality, between my characters and my life. But I never imagined that someone I met online, claiming to be a fan of my work, would blur those lines in a terrifying way, turning my creative process into a chilling collaboration, ultimately making my fictional worlds feel dangerously real. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon. My studio apartment was filled with the soft rustle of sketching paper and the faint scent of ink. I was taking a break from a particularly challenging panel, scrolling through a niche dating app popular with artists and creatives. I was hoping to find someone who understood the unique rhythms of an artist's life. That's when I matched with a guy named Derek Maxwell. His profile was unusual but compelling, a striking self-portrait in a unique art style, a bio that spoke of a deep appreciation for independent comics, and a very specific interest in the psychological nuances of superhero narratives. He mentioned my work by name, praising a particular graphic novel I had published 2 years prior. It felt like a perfect, almost too perfect connection. Our initial messages were incredibly deep and engaging. We discussed my graphic novel, its themes, its character arcs, with an intensity that genuinely flattered me. He seemed to understand my creative vision better than almost anyone. He casually mentioned, "You know, the unresolved trauma of your main character, Shadow Weaver, stemming from the loss of her sister in that specific alleyway incident? I always felt that needed more exploration. It's the driving force, isn't it?" My stomach gave a strange little lurch. The alleyway incident and the specific trauma were not explicitly detailed in the published graphic novel. They were elements I had developed in my private notes, in my writer's Bible, intended for a future sequel. It was a minor detail, but it felt incredibly specific, almost too much so, revealing an intimate knowledge of my unpublished creative process. I brushed it off, thinking he was just incredibly perceptive, or perhaps an advanced literary critic who had read between the lines better than anyone else. I rationalized it as a sign of his deep understanding, not anything sinister. We made plans for our first date at a small, artsy coffee shop near my studio. Derek was even more captivating in person. He was intense, brilliant, and articulate, his eyes burning with an almost unnerving passion when he spoke about art and storytelling. He dissected my work with a level of insight that both thrilled and unsettled me. The date was mesmerizing, but the unsettling anomalies began to escalate immediately after. The very next day, I was in my studio, working on concept sketches for the very sequel Derek had mentioned, focusing on the alleyway incident. I was sketching a new villain, a shadowy figure with intricate, almost geometric patterns on their costume, a design I had just started to conceptualize. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. It read, "Your new villain for Shadow Weaver's sequel, the one with the geometric patterns? Very inspired, Connor. But don't you think the eyes should be a bit more hollow, reflecting the void they carry?" My heart hammered against my ribs. My stomach dropped. The new villain, the geometric patterns, the specific detail about the eyes. This was impossible. These were fresh, unshared sketches on my private drawing tablet, saved in a password-protected folder. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I immediately disconnected from the internet, my hands shaking, feeling a cold prickle on the back of my neck. How could he know? I tried to rationalize it again. Maybe he had hacked my cloud storage, but the speed and precision of his observation felt too immediate, too personal. A few days later, the unease intensified into full-blown panic. I was at home, taking a rare break, watching a documentary. I had decided to procrastinate on a particularly challenging panel for my current comic page, a scene where Shadow Weaver confronts an inner demon in a dreamscape, a very personal, symbolic piece. Moments later, my phone buzzed again with a text from Derek. "Procrastinating on that dreamscape panel, Connor? It's a tough one, I know. But remember, the demon isn't outside her. It's inside. Make sure the shadows reflect that internal struggle, not just external menace." My blood ran cold. The specific panel, its dreamscape nature, the internal struggle I was trying to convey. This was incredibly intimate, reflecting my personal creative block and the emotional core of the scene. He wasn't just guessing. He wasn't just a perceptive fan. He was somehow, intricately, deeply embedded in my creative process, watching my thoughts, tracking my artistic struggles. My heart pounded, a frantic, terrified drumbeat, echoing in the quiet of my studio. I was utterly terrified. I immediately broke off all contact with Derek, blocking him on every platform, changing passwords, and even physically disconnecting my devices from the internet. But it was too late. The messages started coming from new, untraceable numbers and obscure art forums. They were not threats, but chillingly precise critiques of my unreleased work, my ideas, my artistic insecurities. "Your color palette for that new character is a bit too muted, Connor. She needs more vibrancy, a touch of chaos to reflect her true nature. You're struggling with Shadow, Weaver's emotional arc today. Perhaps she needs a moment of quiet despair before her ultimate triumph." She wasn't just watching. He was inside my creative mind, a ghost in my artistic machine, commenting on my every stroke, every idea, every self-doubt, rendering my creative process utterly transparent. The true horror crashed down on me during a late-night session in my studio. I was working on a crucial, climactic scene for my graphic novel, the alleyway incident itself, finally brought to life. I was drawing Shadow Weaver as a child, witnessing the devastating event, a deeply personal and emotionally draining scene for me to create. I was immersed, lost in the raw emotion of the panel. Suddenly, a message popped up on my drawing tablet screen. It wasn't a system notification. It was a chat window from an unknown sender with a profile picture of a shadowy figure, similar to my villain's design. The message read, "The alleyway is darker than you remember, Connor. The sounds, the screams, can you hear them? Draw her pain, draw her fear. Don't hold back. I'm watching every line." My breath hitched in my throat. My entire body froze. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. My stomach lurched. This was on my private drawing tablet, disconnected from the internet. The alleyway incident was my most intimate, unreleased work. He wasn't just observing my current digital life, he was inside my creative space, commenting on my deepest, most vulnerable artistic expression, as if he were looking over my shoulder or even inside my head. My heart hammered, a frantic, desperate rhythm. The idea that someone could have such complete, terrifying access to my most personal creative world, turning my imagination into his playground, was a profound, unbearable horror. Every line, every shadow, every raw emotion felt exposed and manipulated. I slammed my tablet shut, the sudden darkness amplifying my terror. I called the police, my voice a shaky mess, barely able to explain that my artistic sanctuary had been utterly compromised. They listened, but without direct threats or physical evidence of intrusion, their hands were tied. I was left alone with the chilling knowledge that my creative process, my inner world, was no longer safe. I couldn't draw for weeks. The joy I once found in creation was now overshadowed by a constant, chilling paranoia. Every blank page felt like an invitation for his intrusion. Every character I conceived felt like it was being co-opted. I eventually moved my studio, invested in extreme digital security measures, and became intensely guarded about my work in progress. Years have passed since that terrifying incident, but the memory of Derek's messages, especially the one about the alleyway, still haunts me. The violation of my artistic self, the utter collapse of my creative privacy, lingers like a dark shadow in my mind. I still wonder how he gained such deep, pervasive access. Was he a genius hacker, a former apprentice with a twisted obsession, or simply someone who had found a way to bridge the gap between my imagination and his own terrifying reality? I'll never know. All I know is that the horror followed me home, not just into my mind, but into the very core of my artistic identity. It taught me that sometimes the person you think is your biggest fan can be the very person who seeks to control your vision, turning your creative sanctuary into a terrifying, transparent stage, leaving you with the unsettling knowledge that your imagination itself is no longer truly your own. My name is Felix Harrington. For over 7 years, I've made my living as a freelance photographer. My specialty? Events, weddings, corporate gatherings, local festivals, even intimate private parties. It's a job that takes me everywhere, from lavish ballrooms to dimly lit clubs, from sun-drenched parks to secluded private residences. I spend hours, often alone, behind my camera, a silent observer capturing moments. I'm constantly meeting new people, often strangers relying on a quick read of their energy, a flash of intuition. You learn to be adaptable, to blend in, to trust that the people you're working for and the people around you are just normal, that they have normal intentions. It's a profession that puts you in unique situations, seeing slices of life that others don't, often late into the night. But nothing prepared me for the quiet terror of finding out the person behind the lens wasn't just observing me, but actively tracking my every move, turning my world into their personal photo album of dread. It was a brisk autumn evening, the kind where the air holds the scent of fallen leaves and distant bonfires. I was at a small, independent art gallery opening, hired to capture the ambiance and the mingling guests. The gallery was buzzing, filled with soft chatter, the clinking of glasses and the low hum of jazz music. I moved through the crowd, snapping candid shots, feeling that familiar rhythm of my work. It was a routine assignment, easy, enjoyable. As I was packing up my gear, a woman approached me. Her name was Lena Petrova. She had striking green eyes, a vibrant red dress, and a captivating smile. She complimented my work, saying she'd noticed my eye for detail, how I captured emotions. She seemed genuinely interested in my craft, and we chatted for a while. Lena mentioned she was also an artist, a sculptor, and that she frequently visited galleries like this one. She seemed genuinely engaging and intelligent. She handed me a small, elegant card with her website and Instagram handle. "I'd love to see more of your work sometime," she said, her smile warm. I thought nothing of it, just a friendly interaction, a potential networking connection. An initial anomaly, a tiny whisper of unease, came when she mentioned a specific photo I'd taken that night, a close-up of a guest admiring a painting, a shot I hadn't yet processed or shared. I brushed it off, thinking she must have just seen me take it, perhaps over my shoulder. It was a busy room, after all. I rationalized it as a keen observation on her part, not anything strange. We connected on social media a few days later, and our online chats were as engaging as our in-person conversation. She asked insightful questions about my photography, shared details about her sculpting, and we quickly found common ground. She suggested we meet for coffee. It felt natural, a low-pressure way to get to know each other better. Our coffee date was pleasant. Lena was thoughtful, funny, and seemed genuinely kind. As we talked, she brought up my recent trip to the coast. "Your landscape shots from Big Sur were stunning," she said. "The way you captured the fog rolling in, truly atmospheric." My stomach dropped. I had gone to Big Sur 2 months ago. I'd posted a few general photos of the trip on my private Instagram story, visible only to close friends, but I hadn't posted any of the detailed landscape shots she described, let alone the ones focused on the fog. Those were still on my external hard drive, waiting to be edited. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. "Oh, you saw those?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even, a sudden tremor of fear running through me. I thought I hadn't really shared them widely. She just smiled, that same captivating, almost knowing smile, and said, "I have a knack for finding beauty in hidden places." My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't just a keen observer. This was something else. I went home and spent hours going through my social media, my old blog posts, my Flickr account, anything public. There was no mention of Big Sur, no detailed landscape shots. How could she know? The only explanation that made sense was deeply unsettling. She was somehow accessing my private files, or worse, she had seen my photos somewhere I didn't intend. The thought was like a sudden gust of icy wind, chilling me to the bone. Despite the growing unease, I found myself still drawn to her. Her charm was powerful, and I tried to rationalize the creepiness away. Maybe she knew someone who saw them. Maybe I had a public setting on one specific album I'd forgotten. It was a struggle between the logical fear and the hopeful desire for connection. A week later, I had a wedding photography gig in a small town about an hour's drive away. I was up early, loading my gear into my car. As I was about to pull out of my driveway, I received a text from Lena. It simply said, "Good luck with the wedding today, Felix. Hope the light is perfect for your outdoor shots." My heart hammered against my ribs. I hadn't told anyone about this specific wedding. It was a private client, only shared with my closest family. I hadn't posted about it on social media. I hadn't even texted Lena about it. How did she know where I was going, and that it was an outdoor event? The message was delivered with perfect timing, just as I was leaving. It felt less like a well-wishing and more like a surveillance report. The realization hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't just finding things out, she was actively watching me. The feeling of being watched became a constant companion. Every time I looked up from my lens, I felt eyes on me. Every unfamiliar car parked near my apartment sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I blocked Lena's number, deleted her from social media. But it was too late. The messages started coming from burner numbers, almost identical to hers. "Did you enjoy your morning coffee at the Daily Grind today? The barista looked cute. Your new camera lens arrived, I see. A good investment." These weren't guesses. These were observations of my daily routine, my purchases, my private moments. I felt a suffocating sense of invasion, my privacy dissolving around me. One evening, I was editing photos late at night in my home office. My curtains were drawn, the only light coming from my computer screen. I was reviewing a particularly challenging shot, zooming in on details. Suddenly, a message popped up on my desktop screen. It wasn't an email or a social media notification. It was a chat window from an unknown sender with a profile picture of a shadowy figure holding a camera. The message read, "You missed a spot, Felix. Look closer, just above the subject's left shoulder. There's a slight lens flare, but don't worry, your work is usually flawless." My breath hitched. My entire body froze. I looked at the image on my screen, then quickly scanned the room. The window was dark, reflecting only my own terrified face. How could anyone know what I was looking at on my private computer behind closed curtains in real time? My blood ran cold, a wave of sheer panic washing over me. I felt an invisible presence in the room with me. I slammed my laptop shut, the sudden darkness amplifying my terror. He wasn't just observing me from a distance. He had somehow infiltrated my digital life, watching me through my own devices. My heart hammered, a frantic, desperate rhythm. The silent clicking of his camera, I imagined, was now focused on me, trapped in my own home. I scrambled away from my desk, my mind racing. This wasn't just online dating gone wrong. This was a complete collapse of my personal security. The police offered little help, citing a lack of direct threats or physical evidence. They suggested changing my online passwords, which I did frantically. But the sense of being penetrated, of having my most private spaces invaded, lingered. I ended up selling my apartment. The place I had called home, where I had felt safe, was now tainted. Every dark window felt like an eye, every digital interaction a potential trap. I moved to a different city, changed my phone number, even tried to change my professional name online, though that's harder for a freelancer. I installed heavy-duty security on all my devices, and I became obsessed with privacy. Years have passed, but the image of that chat window, the chilling advice about my own photo, remains seared into my memory. Every new piece of tech, every smart device, every social media interaction is viewed through a lens of suspicion. I still work as a photographer, but the joy is muted by a constant vigilance. I rarely share personal details online, and my public profiles are carefully curated. I wonder if Lena, or whoever was behind her, ever found another subject for their twisted obsession. Was it a game to them? A perverse form of artistic critique? I'll never know. The horror followed me home, into my very thoughts, into the way I now perceive the digital world. It taught me that sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones who make overt threats, but the ones who silently, meticulously, turn your life into their personal, terrifying exhibition, leaving you forever exposed. The trust I once had in the seemingly benign nature of online connection, and even in the basic security of my own digital life, shattered into a million pieces. My name is Helena Vaughn, and for the past decade I've been a veterinary technician, a vet tech. My days are filled with everything from cuddling puppies and kittens to assisting in complex surgeries, from comforting anxious pet owners to delivering tough news. It's a job that requires endless compassion, a steady hand, and an ability to connect deeply with both animals and their humans. You see the incredible bonds people share with their pets, the unconditional love, the heartbreak when they lose them. It teaches you a lot about human nature, about empathy, and about the raw emotions that surface when someone's beloved companion is sick or hurting. I thought I understood the bond between humans and their pets, but I never imagined that bond could be twisted into something so profoundly disturbing and dangerous, turning a simple online date into a nightmare that stalked my every interaction with my patients. It was a particularly busy Wednesday at the clinic. We'd had an emergency overnight, and the waiting room was full of worried faces and wagging tails. I was exhausted but running on autopilot, finding comfort in the routine. Later that evening, unwinding at home, I decided to finally check out a new dating app a friend had recommended. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just a casual connection. That's when I matched with a guy named Silas Monroe. His profile pictures showed a handsome man with a kind smile holding a fluffy white cat. His bio talked about his love for animals, his volunteer work at a local shelter, and his passion for hiking. It seemed like a perfect fit, a shared love for creatures big and small. Our initial conversations were easy and flowed well. He asked about my work, showing genuine interest, not just polite curiosity. He even asked about specific breeds, showing knowledge beyond the average pet owner. He mentioned he had a cat, a beautiful rag doll named Snowflake, and asked if I knew anything about the breed's specific needs. I thought it was sweet, a guy who cared deeply for his pet. An initial anomaly, a tiny, almost imperceptible detail, surfaced when he casually mentioned, "Oh, I heard ragdolls can be prone to specific dental issues, especially if they don't get regular cleanings." I had just assisted on a ragdoll dental surgery that morning, something I hadn't posted about or mentioned to anyone outside the clinic. I brushed it off, thinking he was just well-researched, or maybe it was a common enough issue for the breed that he'd heard it from someone else. It was a minor point, easily rationalized. Our first date was at a dog-friendly cafe, which I thought was a charming touch. Silas was exactly as charming in person, perhaps even more so. He talked passionately about animal welfare, shared anecdotes about his cat, and listened intently when I spoke about my day. As we were finishing up, he mentioned a specific patient I had seen earlier that week. "How's little Buster doing?" he asked, referring to a golden retriever puppy who had come in for his first shots. "He seemed a bit nervous, but I'm sure you put him at ease." My stomach plummeted. Buster was a new patient. His name was only in our clinic's private database. I hadn't posted anything about him. No one outside the clinic would know his name, let alone that he was nervous. I forced a laugh, trying to hide the sudden, cold dread that gripped me. "Oh, Buster? He's great. How did you know about him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He just smiled, a strangely knowing, almost secretive smile. "I have my ways," he said, and then changed the subject smoothly. That night, my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The casual mention of Buster, the precise detail about his nervousness, It gnawed at me. I replayed our conversations, searching for any clue. I went through my social media again, convinced I must have accidentally shared something, but there was nothing. No public mention of Buster or the ragdoll dental surgery. The thought that he knew these intimate details of my work, details only accessible through private patient records, sent a shiver down my spine. It felt like a deep invasion of my professional space, bleeding into my personal life. Still, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a client of ours knew him. Maybe he had a friend who worked at the clinic. The hopeful part of me, the part that wanted to believe in the charming, animal-loving man, fought against the growing suspicion. A few days later, I was walking my own dog, a scruffy terrier mix named Charlie, in our usual park. I was enjoying the crisp morning air, Charlie happily sniffing every bush. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Silas. Charlie looked so happy in his red harness today. He's really enjoying the new dog park trail, isn't he? Great choice of harness, it really suits him. My blood ran cold. I hadn't seen Silas, or thought I hadn't. I hadn't posted any pictures of Charlie in his new red harness. I'd bought it just the day before. And the new dog park trail? That was a secluded, out-of-the-way path I'd only recently discovered. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic pulse of fear. He wasn't just guessing. He was there. He was watching me. The sense of unease intensified into full-blown panic. I immediately blocked Silas's number and his social media profiles. But it was too late. The messages started coming from different numbers, anonymous and unsettling. "Did you enjoy your coffee this morning, Helena? Saw you with Dr. Evans discussing the new cat food protocols. Very interesting. Poor Mrs. Henderson's cat, Mittens, is looking a bit poorly today. Give her an extra hug from me." These weren't general observations. These were details from my workplace, from specific client interactions, things that only someone inside the clinic or someone with access to our records would know. I felt utterly exposed, not just personally, but professionally. My workplace, a place of healing and trust, felt compromised. The true horror crashed down on me one busy afternoon at the clinic. I was in a consultation room with a distressed client whose elderly cat was gravely ill. We were discussing end-of-life options, a sensitive, heartbreaking conversation. The client was in tears, and I was trying my best to offer comfort and guidance. Suddenly, my personal cell phone, which I'd placed face down on the counter, vibrated. It was a text from an unknown number. I glanced at it, my heart jumping into my throat. The message read, "It's a tough decision, Helena, but you're doing the right thing. Tell Mrs. Peterson I'm thinking of her and Mittens. And remember, sometimes love means letting go." My breath caught in my throat. Mrs. Peterson and Mittens. The specific names, the exact context of the conversation I was having right at that moment. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. My stomach lurched. He wasn't just watching me from a distance, he was actively listening. He was there, somehow, eavesdropping on the most private, vulnerable moments of my patients and their owners. I looked around the small consultation room, my eyes darting to the ventilation grate, the closed door, the small window. Every shadow seemed to hold his presence. I felt a profound sense of violation, not just for myself, but for the sacred trust I held with my clients. My heart hammered, a frantic, terrified drumbeat. He had invaded the very heart of my professional life, making a sanctuary feel like a cage. I ended the consultation as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. I told my colleagues what was happening, showing them the texts. we immediately contacted the police. They investigated, but without concrete evidence of how he was getting the information or proof of his physical presence, they couldn't do much beyond advising me to be cautious. The idea that someone could be so deeply entrenched in my life, knowing the most intimate details of my work, was a horror I couldn't shake. I started looking for another job almost immediately. The clinic, once a place of comfort and purpose, became a source of constant anxiety. Every time a new client came in, every new face I saw, I wondered if it was him or someone he knew feeding him information. I changed my routines, installed cameras at my home, and became extremely guarded with any personal or professional details. Years have passed, and I've since moved to another city, working at a different clinic. But the chilling memory of Silas's texts, especially the one in the consultation room, still haunts me. The violation of that sacred trust, the invasion of those deeply vulnerable moments, lingers. I still wonder how he got that information. Was he a disgruntled ex-employee from a previous clinic? A tech-savvy stalker who hacked our systems? A client who somehow befriended me to gain access? I'll never know. All I know is that the horror followed me home, not just into my mind, but into the very core of my professional identity. I now guard my privacy with an intensity that borders on paranoia. The internet, once a place for easy connection, is now a labyrinth of potential threats, and the trust I once had in the basic safety of my work environment and in the boundaries between my personal and professional life was irrevocably shattered by a man who seemed to know everything about me and my patients, turning compassion into a weapon of control. My name is Rosalie Bennett, and for the past 8 years, I've worked as a librarian in our city's historical archives. My days are spent among dusty tomes, fragile documents, and the quiet whispers of the past. I'm surrounded by stories, by forgotten lives, by the meticulous details that make up history. It's a job for someone who loves puzzles, who enjoys research, who thrives on uncovering hidden truths. I pride myself on my sharp memory, my logical mind, and my ability to sift through vast amounts of information. I thought I understood how information worked, how it was stored, and how it could be accessed. But nothing prepared me for the chilling realization that someone else was researching me, digging into the most private, long-buried corners of my past, turning my own history into a weapon of terror. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. The library had just closed, and the silence of the stacks was a comfort after a busy day. I was at home, curled up on my sofa, browsing a new online dating app. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just a nice distraction. That's when I matched with a man named Ashton Pierce. His profile showed a kind face, intelligent eyes, and a passion for local history, just like me. He seemed charming, articulate, and his bio mentioned a love for uncovering forgotten stories, something I deeply related to. Our initial messages were fantastic. We talked about obscure historical figures, local legends, and even specific research methods. He seemed genuinely interested in my work, and his knowledge was impressive. He mentioned a specific, minor detail about a local historical event. You know, that old textile mill fire from 1928? I read that your great-grandmother, Eleanor Hayes, was actually one of the first responders, even though she wasn't a formal firefighter. She helped evacuate so many families. My stomach gave a strange little lurch. Eleanor Hayes was indeed my great-grandmother, and she had been involved in that fire. But this was not public knowledge. It was a detail only mentioned in a small, self-published family memoir I'd inherited, a book that only existed in my family. I had never spoken of it online or off. I paused, a flicker of unease, but then brushed it off. Maybe he'd stumbled upon some extremely rare local publication, a forgotten newspaper clipping. I rationalized it as a stroke of incredible coincidence, a shared niche interest. Our first date was at a cozy, dimly lit coffee shop. Ashton was even more captivating in person. He had a deep, soothing voice, and his eyes held a spark of genuine curiosity. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing effortlessly. As we were about to leave, he looked at me with a knowing smile. "You know," he said, "I bet you miss that old oak tree in your backyard on Elm Street, don't you? It looked like a perfect climbing tree for a little girl." My stomach dropped. A wave of cold dread washed over me. I hadn't lived on Elm Street since I was 7 years old. That address, that specific detail about the oak tree, it wasn't public. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm. "Elm Street?" I managed to stammer, trying to keep my voice light, as if I hadn't understood. "How did you know about that?" He just shrugged, his smile unchanging. "Oh, I just have a knack for finding interesting details." The way he said it, so casual, so calm, sent a shiver down my spine. That night, my instincts were screaming that something was deeply, terribly wrong. I went home and spent hours, even days, meticulously searching my entire online footprint. Old social media accounts, forgotten forums, even archaic school directories. Nothing. There was no mention of Elm Street, no photos of that oak tree. This information was not publicly available. The realization that he had dug so deep into my past, into my childhood, chilled me to the bone. It felt like a profound invasion, like someone was sifting through the most private archives of my life without my permission. Despite the growing fear, I still struggled. Part of me, the part that wanted to believe in the charming, intelligent man, tried to come up with rational explanations. Maybe he had a private investigator friend. Maybe I had mentioned it accidentally, long ago, in some obscure online chat. I tried to fight the cold, creeping terror. A few days later, I was on my lunch break at the library, scrolling through my phone. An old, almost forgotten photo of me as a child popped up in my memories, a photo only visible to me on my phone. It was a picture of me and my estranged Aunt Carol at a family picnic, a sensitive topic. Moments later, I received a text from Ashton. "That picnic photo from your memories today, with Aunt Carol. You know, she always did have the best laugh. Such a shame you two grew apart." My blood ran cold. He couldn't possibly have seen that. It was a private memory notification on my own device. My heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat of pure panic. He wasn't just finding details, he was seeing things that were impossible to see. He was watching me. I immediately canceled our next date, inventing a sudden illness. I blocked Ashton's number, deleted him from all social media. But it didn't stop. Cryptic messages started coming from unknown numbers, mentioning other deeply personal, non-public details from my family history. "Remember that summer at your grandmother's cottage? The one where you found the old locket? Your father's old stamp collection, the one he kept hidden. Quite a treasure." These were things only my closest family or I knew. My sense of security was completely shattered. My past, once a comforting foundation, now felt like a dangerous open book, with Ashton as its malicious reader. The true horror crashed down on me one rainy evening. I was home alone, the blinds drawn, trying to find some sense of peace. My phone buzzed. It was a picture message from an unknown number. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was a blurry, grainy photo, taken at night, but I recognized it instantly. It was my childhood home on Elm Street. The angle of the shot suggested the photographer was standing right in front of the house, perhaps even in the yard. My breath hitched in my throat. I could see the distinct shape of the old oak tree, its branches stark against the dark sky. A text followed immediately. "The old oak tree is still there, Rosalie, but it looks lonely without you," I screamed. A raw, guttural sound ripped from my throat. I threw my phone across the room, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, terrified drumbeat. He wasn't just finding information. He was physically retracing my steps, invading the very sacred places of my childhood. He had been there, standing outside the home where I grew up, watching, observing, making my most cherished memories into a twisted part of his terrifying game. I felt utterly exposed, violated, as if my entire past had been ransacked and laid bare. The world outside my window, once a quiet, familiar street, now felt like a hunting ground. I called the police, my voice a shaky mess, barely able to explain how someone could know so much about my life and how they could be at my childhood home. They listened, but without direct threats or proof of physical trespass, their hands were tied. I was left alone with the chilling knowledge that he wasn't just online, he was real, and he was actively stalking my past. That night, I didn't sleep. The horror followed me home, not just in my mind, but into the very foundations of my identity. I packed a bag and left my apartment, unable to stand the thought that he knew everything about me, even my current address. I eventually moved to another state, changed my phone number, and took a leave of absence from the archives. The job I once loved, which celebrated history, now felt like a cruel irony. Years have passed, but the feeling of my past being an open book, manipulated by a stranger, never truly fades. Every time I meet someone new, every time I share a detail about myself, I hesitate, wondering if they already know more than I've told them. I still wonder about Ashton. Was he a master of open-source intelligence, or something far more sinister? Did he ever find another subject for his twisted research? I'll never know. All I know is that he taught me a terrifying lesson. Sometimes the information you think is hidden, safe in the quiet corners of your past, can be unearthed and used against you. The trust I once had in the boundaries of my personal history and in the relative anonymity of my private life was irrevocably shattered by a man who turned my own story into a living nightmare. The quiet peace I once found in the archives is now replaced by a chilling suspicion that some stories are better left buried. My name is Nolan Whitfield, and for the past 5 years, I've been a night security guard for a sprawling corporate campus. My shifts are mostly solitary, long hours spent walking empty hallways, checking locked doors, and monitoring surveillance screens. It's a quiet job, often boring, but I pride myself on my vigilance, on my ability to spot anything out of place in the dark, silent buildings. You get used to the stillness, the echoing footsteps, the hum of fluorescent lights. I thought I knew every inch of my territory, every routine, every shadow. I believed I was the one watching, the one guarding. But I never imagined that someone I met online would turn the tables, making me the one being watched, turning my secure workplace into a chilling stage for their terrifying obsession. It was a particularly quiet Tuesday night, halfway through my shift. The corporate building was a cavernous, silent beast, bathed in the soft glow of emergency lights. During my break, I was swiping through a dating app, trying to break the monotony. That's when I matched with Celeste Langley. Her profile was energetic, full of smiles, and mentioned late-night hobbies like stargazing, which I thought was quirky and fun. Our initial chats were light and engaging, a welcome distraction from the quiet of my job. Celeste was curious about my work, asking about what it was like to be a night guard. She casually mentioned, "It must get pretty spooky in those empty office buildings at night. Do you ever hear strange noises on the 3rd floor near the old data center? I always imagine ghosts haunting those places." My stomach gave a strange little lurch. The 3rd floor data center was a very specific, usually quiet part of my patrol route, an area not commonly known or discussed. It was a minor detail, but it felt oddly specific. I brushed it off, thinking it was just a common trope from movies, or maybe she had a friend who worked in a similar building. I rationalized it as a quirky guess, not anything sinister. We made plans for a first date, which was scheduled for my next day off. Celeste was charming and easy to talk to, full of life and laughter. The conversation was easy, and I genuinely enjoyed her company. But the unsettling anomalies began to escalate immediately after. The very next night, during my patrol, I was walking through the deserted lobby, checking the newly installed potted plants. My phone buzzed with a text from Celeste. It read, "Hey, are those new plants in the lobby? They look great. So much greenery for such a modern building." My heart hammered against my ribs. I had literally just noticed those plants myself during my first round only minutes ago. They had been installed late that afternoon, after everyone else had left. No one outside the building would know about them. My stomach dropped. I immediately felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I quickly checked the surveillance cameras, reviewing the lobby footage, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. No one had entered or left. How could she know? I tried to rationalize it again. Maybe a late working cleaner had mentioned it to a friend, but the timing felt too perfect, too precise. A few nights later, the unease intensified into full-blown panic. I was doing my rounds, checking the loading dock, an area that was usually deserted and secured. I found one of the heavy steel doors slightly ajar, a minor security breach. I quickly secured it, making a mental note to report it. Moments later, my phone buzzed again with a text from Celeste. "Don't forget to check the back door, Nolan. Sometimes those delivery guys leave it ajar, you know." My blood ran cold. The specific detail of the back door, which was the loading dock door, and the mention of it being ajar, it was too accurate to be a coincidence. She knew my movements. She knew my observations. She was watching me in real time, within the very walls of my supposedly secure workplace. My heart pounded, a frantic, terrified drumbeat echoing in the silent corridors. I was terrified. I immediately canceled all plans with Celeste and blocked her number, along with all her social media profiles. But the relentless barrage of messages from new unknown numbers began. They were always specific, always describing my exact location or actions within the building. "Just finished your coffee break, Nolan? Hope it was relaxing. Looks like you're heading to the executive floor now. Don't forget to check the CEO's office. Never know what secrets might be lurking there." The messages were never overtly threatening, but their precision was a terror in itself. They proved she was watching my every move, turning my routine patrols into a chilling, unseen performance for her. The true horror crashed down on me during my shift late one night. I was doing my usual rounds, the building completely silent save for my own footsteps. I walked into the small security office, a place I considered my sanctuary. On my desk, neatly placed on top of my logbook, was a small, hand-drawn sketch. It was a crude but unmistakable map of the building's floor plan, marked with red lines tracing my exact patrol route. My breath hitched in my throat. My entire body froze. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. How could she have gotten in here? How could she know my route so precisely? Then, on my very next round, as I approached the third floor near the old data center, the very place she had mentioned in her first text, I saw something gleaming on a filing cabinet. It was a small, framed photo. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was a selfie. Celeste. She was smiling, her green eyes wide and bright, and in the background, unmistakably, was the exact hallway I was standing in. She was inside the building. She had been here, physically, watching me, leaving tokens of her presence. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound ripped from my throat, echoing through the empty halls. I threw the photo, scrambling backwards, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, terrified drumbeat. My workplace, my sanctuary, my supposedly secure territory had been utterly violated. He wasn't just observing me from a distance. She was actively, physically intruding into my space, playing a terrifying game of cat and mouse within the very walls I was paid to protect. I felt utterly exposed, vulnerable. My vigilance turned against me. I called my supervisor, my voice a shaky mess, barely able to explain that the danger wasn't outside, it was already inside. I quit that job the very next day. The silence of the empty building, once comforting, was now filled with imagined footsteps, with the ghost of her knowing smile. I struggled with sleep, with trust, with feeling safe in any enclosed space. I moved to a different city, found a completely different line of work, and became deeply paranoid about my personal security. Years have passed since that terrifying shift, but the memory of that map on my desk and Celeste's smiling face in my building still haunts me. The feeling that someone could so easily bypass my defenses, could turn my most secure environment into their personal playground, leaves me forever changed. I wonder if she was ever caught, if she continued her terrifying game with other security guards in other empty buildings. I'll never know. All I know is that the horror followed me home, not just into my mind, but into the very core of my ability to feel safe and secure. It taught me that sometimes the greatest threats aren't from the outside world, but from an unseen observer who infiltrates your most protected spaces, turning your routine into a chilling performance, and leaving you with the unsettling knowledge that you were never truly alone. My name is Anna Perez, and for the past 6 years, I've been a kindergarten teacher. My days are a whirlwind of tiny hands, spilled paint, laughter, and sometimes tears. It's a job that demands endless patience, a loving heart, and a constant awareness of every little detail, every shift in a child's mood, every potential danger. I'm trained to create a safe, nurturing environment, to spot anything that feels out of place, to protect the most vulnerable among us. You learn to trust your gut instincts, especially when it comes to the safety of children. I thought I knew how to identify a safe space, how to build a trusting relationship. But I never imagined that someone I met online would turn my sense of safety against me, making my gentle world of innocence feel like a stage for their unsettling intrusion, ultimately threatening the very sanctuary I worked so hard to create. It was a warm, sunny Tuesday afternoon. The school day had just ended, and the playground was filled with the happy shouts of children waiting for their parents. After making sure all my students were safely picked up, I returned to my quiet classroom to tidy up. Later that evening at home, I was scrolling through a newer, more exclusive dating app a colleague had recommended. I was hoping for something more serious, a genuine connection. That's when I matched with a guy named Jeremy Stone. His profile was intriguing: a kind smile, photos of him volunteering at a community garden, and a bio that spoke of a love for learning and a gentle spirit. He said he was an aspiring children's book author. Our initial messages were wonderful. He was articulate, thoughtful, and expressed a genuine admiration for teachers. He asked about my experiences, the challenges, the rewards. He mentioned how much he respected people who shaped young minds. He casually mentioned, "It must be so rewarding to see their little faces light up, especially when they finally grasp a new concept, like fractions, even for 5-year-olds." My stomach gave a strange little lurch. Fractions? While some advanced kindergartners might be introduced to the concept of sharing, full-blown fractions were definitely a first-grade topic. It was a minor detail, a small inconsistency, but it felt a bit off. I brushed it off, thinking he was just speaking generally about early education, not knowing the specific curriculum. I rationalized it as a slight misunderstanding, not anything sinister. We made plans for our first date at a quiet cafe downtown. Jeremy was even more charming in person. He listened intently, made me laugh, and his eyes seemed genuinely warm. He talked about his passion for storytelling and how he hoped to inspire children. The date went really well. But the unsettling anomalies began almost immediately after. The very next day, I was at school during our morning circle time. My kindergarten class was buzzing with excitement as we were discussing our new unit on community helpers. One of my students, a bright-eyed boy named Levi, piped up, "My dad says you're the best teacher, Ms. Perez. He says you teach us how to be kind, and that's the most important job." My heart warmed at his words. Later that day, during my lunch break, I received a text from Jeremy. "It sounds like you had a wonderful morning circle with your class today, Anna. It's lovely to hear how much your students appreciate you, especially little Levi. You truly are making a difference." My heart hammered against my ribs. I hadn't told him anything about community helpers or Levi. I hadn't even texted him since our date. Levi's comment was made in a private classroom setting. My stomach dropped. I immediately felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. How could he know? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he knew Levi's parents from the community garden, but the detail of morning circle and the specific unit topic felt too precise. A few days later, the unease intensified into full-blown panic. We were preparing for our annual school carnival, and my class was busy decorating posters in the classroom. I had just finished hanging up a particularly colorful one near the window. My phone buzzed again with a text from Jeremy. "Those carnival posters are looking fantastic, Anna. Your class clearly has a great eye for color. The one with the glitter stars near the window is especially bright." My blood ran cold. The specific detail about the glitter stars and its placement near the window was impossible for him to know unless he had been watching my classroom. My heart pounded, a frantic, terrified drumbeat, echoing in the quiet classroom after the children had left for the day. He was watching. He was observing my interactions with the children. I was terrified. I immediately canceled all further communication with Jeremy, blocking his number and all his social media. But it didn't stop. Messages started coming from new, unknown numbers. They weren't overtly threatening, but their precision was a terror in itself. "Little Mia in your class finally mastered her shoelaces today. What a triumph. Saw you helping Ben with his drawing during free play. Your patience is truly remarkable." These were intimate, moment-by-moment observations of my teaching, my interactions with individual children, things that only someone inside the classroom or someone with direct, sustained visual access could know. My sense of security was completely shattered. My classroom, once a haven of innocence, now felt like a glass box. The true horror crashed down on me during the school play rehearsal one afternoon. My kindergarten class was excitedly practicing their lines on the small stage in the school auditorium. I was seated in the front row, directing them, beaming with pride. Suddenly, my personal cell phone, which I'd placed on the chair next to me, vibrated. It was a text from an unknown number. My hands trembled as I opened it. The message read, "Little Natalia, second row, third from the left. She keeps forgetting her line about the sunshine. Maybe she needs a little more encouragement from her favorite teacher." My breath hitched in my throat. My entire body froze. I looked at Natalia, exactly where he had described her, struggling with her line. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. My stomach lurched. He wasn't just watching me from outside, he was watching me, in real time, as I worked with my students. He knew specific children, their names, their struggles, their locations in the room. He was there, somehow, in the school, observing us. My heart hammered, a frantic, desperate rhythm. The idea that someone could be so deeply entrenched in my professional space, observing the children I was sworn to protect, was a profound, unbearable horror. The sanctity of my classroom, the innocence of my students, felt utterly compromised. I ended the rehearsal immediately, my hands shaking. I told the school principal what was happening, showing them the texts. We immediately contacted the police. They investigated, searching the school, checking surveillance footage from the exterior, but found no direct evidence of Jeremy's physical presence, no forced entry. They advised me to be vigilant, but I was left with the chilling knowledge that someone had invaded my sanctuary, my workplace, a place filled with defenseless children. I couldn't go back to that classroom. The thought of his unseen eyes on my students, on me, was unbearable. I took an immediate leave of absence, and eventually I transferred to a different school in a different district over an hour away. The joy I once found in teaching was now shadowed by a constant, chilling fear. I became intensely private, careful about what I shared online, and hypervigilant in my new classroom. Years have passed since that terrifying incident, but the memory of Jeremy's texts, especially the one about Natalia in the school play, still haunts me. The violation of that sacred trust, the invasion of a space dedicated to children, lingers like a cold specter. I still wonder how he gained such access, how he knew so much. Was he a parent volunteer, an employee with insider access, or simply a master manipulator who found a way into the building? I'll never know. All I know is that the horror followed me home, not just into my mind, but into the very core of my professional identity and my ability to feel safe in any environment where children are present. It taught me that sometimes the search for connection can lead to the most unthinkable invasions, turning a place of learning and growth into a terrifying stage for an unseen predator. The innocence of my classroom was irrevocably shattered, leaving behind a profound sense of vulnerability. My name is Tobias Rowan, and for the past 9 years, I've worked as a software developer, often specializing in cybersecurity. My world is one of code, algorithms, and networks. I spend my days building digital defenses, finding vulnerabilities, and protecting sensitive data. I understand how the internet works, the dark corners of the web, and the sophisticated ways people can exploit technology. I thought I was savvy, immune to the usual online pitfalls, capable of spotting a digital red flag from a mile away. I trusted in my knowledge, my ability to secure my own digital life. But I never imagined that someone I met online, claiming to be a kindred spirit in the tech world, would turn my own expertise against me, making my digital existence a chillingly transparent window into my soul, and threatening to expose every secret I held. It was a late Monday night. I was at home, debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code when I decided to take a break and browse one of the niche dating apps geared towards tech professionals. I was looking for someone who understood my world, someone who spoke the language of ones and zeros. That's when I matched with Rachel Reed. Her profile was impressive. She claimed to be a fellow cybersecurity expert with a passion for ethical hacking and digital privacy. Her bio was witty, filled with obscure tech jokes, and mentioned specific coding languages I specialized in. It felt like a perfect, almost unbelievable match. Our initial messages were thrilling. We talked for hours, diving deep into technical concepts, sharing war stories from our respective fields, and even debating the ethics of AI. She displayed an incredible depth of knowledge, rattling off complex terms and concepts with ease. She casually mentioned, the latest zero-day exploit for that obscure Linux kernel vulnerability. It's far more dangerous than the mainstream media lets on. I've been tracking its variants, and one of them is particularly nasty if you're running an older Apache server. My stomach gave a strange little lurch. That specific zero-day exploit was indeed a very niche, recently discovered vulnerability, something not widely discussed outside of very specialized forums, and the Apache server detail was specific to a personal project I was working on, an older server I used for testing that I hadn't discussed with anyone. It was a minor detail, but it felt incredibly specific, almost too much so. I brushed it off, thinking she was just incredibly well-informed, or perhaps had seen a post in one of my specialized private forums. I rationalized it as a shared expertise, not anything sinister. We made plans for our first date at a quiet, untrendy bar, the kind only techies knew about. Rachel was even more captivating in person. She was brilliant, engaging, and had a sharp, analytical mind that I deeply admired. We spoke for hours about cryptography, data privacy, and the future of the internet. The date was exhilarating. But the unsettling anomalies began to escalate immediately after. The very next day, I was at work, deep into my project. I was struggling with a particular bug in my code, a subtle error that was causing a memory leak. I'd been working on it for hours, frustrated. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. It read, "Having trouble with that memory leak, Tobias? Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes can spot the smallest syntax error. Check line 742, near the data structure initialization. Just a thought." My heart hammered against my ribs. My stomach dropped. The bug, the memory leak, the specific line number, the general area of the code, this was impossible. I hadn't discussed my work, let alone this specific bug, with anyone. This was on my work computer in a secure environment. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I immediately disconnected from the work network, feeling a cold prickle on the back of my neck. How could she know? I tried to rationalize it again. Maybe she had hacked into my company's network, but that seemed too bold, too unlikely for a first date. Still, the fear was growing. A few days later, the unease intensified into full-blown panic. I was at home, working on my personal computer, checking my encrypted email. I just received a sensitive email from a colleague about a new, highly confidential project. Moments later, my phone buzzed again with a text from Rachel. That new project with Project Nightingale sounds incredibly challenging, Tobias, but I have no doubt you'll excel. Just make sure your PGP keys are up to date, always. My blood ran cold. Project Nightingale was the internal code name for the highly confidential project, a name only known to a very small, secure team. My PGP keys were for my personal, encrypted emails. The confluence of these two highly sensitive, private details, delivered with such precision, was terrifying. She wasn't just guessing. She wasn't just a fellow tech expert. She was somehow, intricately, deeply embedded in my digital life, watching my communications, tracking my projects. My heart pounded, a frantic, terrified drumbeat, echoing in the quiet of my supposedly secure apartment. I was utterly terrified. I immediately broke off all contact with Rachel, blocking her on every platform, changing all my passwords, installing every security measure I knew. But it was too late. The messages started coming from new, untraceable numbers and encrypted chat clients. They were not threats, but chillingly precise observations of my digital actions. Deleted your old forum posts about that controversial privacy debate? Good move. Always be careful what you leave online. Saw you updated your personal firewall. Excellent choice of rule set. She wasn't just watching. She was inside my digital world, a ghost in the machine, commenting on my every move, every security measure I took, rendering them useless. The true horror crashed down on me during a particularly stressful evening. I was at home, trying to unwind, but my mind was racing, feeling utterly exposed. I decided to distract myself by playing an old, obscure online game from my childhood, something I hadn't touched in years, using a decades-old, nearly forgotten username. It was a private, nostalgic escape. Suddenly, a message popped up within the game itself, a private message from another player. The username was unfamiliar, a string of seemingly random characters. The message read, "You're still playing Starfarer Chronicles, Tobias. I remember you were always terrible at the space combat missions, but you always loved building those elaborate trade routes. Some things never change, do they?" My breath hitched in my throat. My entire body froze. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. My stomach lurched. This was an ancient game, with a username I hadn't used in over 15 years, on a platform I rarely visited. How could she possibly know this? Not just that I was playing, but my old username, my playstyle, my childhood habits. He wasn't just observing my current digital life. She had access to my entire digital history, every footprint, every forgotten password, every old account. She was inside my past, my present, and was actively using it against me. My heart hammered, a frantic, desperate rhythm. The idea that someone could have such complete, terrifying access to my entire digital existence, turning my expertise into my greatest vulnerability, was a profound, unbearable horror. Every click, every keystroke, every private moment felt exposed. I slammed my laptop shut, the sudden silence amplifying my terror. I called the police, my voice a shaky mess, barely able to explain that my digital life had been utterly compromised. They listened, but without direct threats or physical evidence of intrusion, their hands were tied. I was left alone with the chilling knowledge that my entire digital identity was no longer my own. I couldn't work for days. The very tools of my trade, computers, networks, the internet, became sources of profound anxiety. I spent weeks rebuilding my digital security, creating entirely new online identities, and even considering a complete digital detox. The privacy I once believed I controlled was an illusion. Years have passed since that terrifying incident, but the memory of Rachel's messages, especially the one in the online game, still haunts me. The violation of my digital self, the utter collapse of my perceived security, lingers like a cold virus in my system. I still wonder how she gained such deep, pervasive access. Was she a former colleague, a black hat hacker with a grudge, or simply a genius who found a perverse thrill in dissecting my digital soul? I'll never know. All I know is that the horror followed me home, not just into my mind, but into the very core of my professional identity and my ability to trust in the digital world. It taught me that sometimes the person you think is a kindred spirit in the vastness of the internet can be the very person who unravels your entire existence, leaving you with the unsettling knowledge that every secret you thought was safe, every digital trace you left, can be found and weaponized. The trust I once had in technology and in my own ability to defend myself was irrevocably shattered. My name is Hugo Lennox, and for the past 10 years, I've been a professional chef, specializing in high-end catering. My life revolves around ingredients, recipes, and the delicate art of presentation. I'm constantly working with my hands, my sense of taste and smell finely tuned, always striving for perfection under pressure. You learn to trust your instincts in the kitchen, to taste for subtle nuances, to know when something is perfectly balanced or dangerously off. I thought I understood the ingredients of a good relationship, the flavors that blend well, the ones that spoil the dish. But I never imagined that someone I met online, claiming to be a culinary enthusiast, would turn my passion against me, making my world of exquisite tastes a chilling landscape of paranoia, ultimately making me question the very food I prepared. It was a rare, quiet evening. After a grueling week catering a major corporate event, I was finally home, unwinding. I decided to check out a new food-focused dating app that promised to connect people with shared culinary passions. I was hoping for someone who appreciated good food as much as I did. That's when I matched with a woman named Arabella Sloan. Her profile was vibrant, filled with photos of gourmet dishes she claimed to have cooked, and a bio that spoke of a deep love for experimental cuisine and exotic spices. She said she was a food blogger. It felt like a perfect match, a shared obsession. Our initial messages were fantastic. We talked for hours, exchanging recipes, debating cooking techniques, and sharing recommendations for obscure ingredients. She displayed an impressive knowledge of food, rattling off complex terms and even critiquing Michelin-starred restaurants with surprising accuracy. She casually mentioned, "You know, that new truffle oil you're experimenting with for your risotto? I heard it's surprisingly difficult to balance, even for experienced chefs. You have to be careful not to overpower the natural earthiness." My stomach gave a strange little lurch. Truffle oil for risotto was a very specific new experiment I was trying, something I hadn't discussed with anyone, not even my sous chef. It was a minor detail, but it felt incredibly specific, almost too much so. I brushed it off, thinking she must be incredibly well connected in the local food scene, or perhaps had seen a vague social media post I'd forgotten. I rationalized it as a shared passion, not anything sinister. We made plans for our first date at a small, critically acclaimed bistro. Arabella was even more captivating in person. She was intelligent, witty, and had a passion for food that matched my own. We spent hours dissecting each dish, talking about flavor profiles and textures. The date was exhilarating, but the unsettling anomalies began to escalate immediately after. The very next day, I was in my professional kitchen, preparing a complex tasting menu for a potential client. I was working on a delicate, pan-seared scallops dish, trying to achieve the perfect caramelization. My phone buzzed with a text from Arabella. It read, "Your scallops technique is almost flawless, Hugo. Just a tiny bit more heat on the pan for that crispier crust, perhaps, but otherwise a masterpiece in the making." My heart hammered against my ribs. My stomach dropped. The scallops, the specific technique, the suggestion for more heat. This was impossible. I hadn't discussed my menu, let alone my technique, with anyone outside my kitchen team. This was in my private, professional kitchen in a secured building. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I immediately looked around the kitchen, checking every window, every corner, feeling a cold prickle on the back of my neck. How could she know? I tried to rationalize it again. Maybe she had a friend who worked in the building, but the detail and timing felt too perfect, too precise. A few days later, the unease intensified into full-blown panic. I was at home, trying out a new recipe for a gluten-free chocolate souffle. It was a notoriously difficult dish, and I was meticulously measuring ingredients. Moments later, my phone buzzed again with a text from Arabella. "That gluten-free chocolate souffle looks like a challenge, Hugo. Remember, the key to a perfect rise is in the egg whites. Don't overmix them. You're doing great, though." My blood ran cold. The specific recipe, the gluten-free detail, the technical advice about egg whites. This was private information, something I was doing in the solitude of my own home kitchen. She wasn't just guessing. She wasn't just a fellow food enthusiast. She was somehow, intricately, deeply embedded in my private life, watching my actions, tracking my experiments. My heart pounded, a frantic, terrified drumbeat, echoing in the quiet of my supposedly secure apartment. I was utterly terrified. I immediately broke off all contact with Arabella, blocking her on every platform, changing my phone number, and even looking into privacy settings for my smart home devices. But it was too late. The messages started coming from new, untraceable numbers and obscure culinary forums. They were not threats, but chillingly precise observations of my cooking, my grocery lists, even my dining habits. "Saw you picked up organic rainbow carrots today. Excellent choice for that bisque you're planning. Your dinner tonight, simple grilled salmon and asparagus. A healthy classic, but you forgot the lemon wedge." She wasn't just watching, she was inside my home, inside my routines, commenting on my every culinary move, making my most personal actions a subject of her unsettling critique. The true horror crashed down on me during a major catering event. I was overseeing a bustling kitchen, surrounded by my team, the air thick with the aromas of dozens of dishes. We were in the final push before service, plates flying out, everything needing to be perfect. I was personally plating a signature dessert, a complex, deconstructed berry tart. My hands, usually so steady, were trembling with the pressure. Suddenly, my personal phone, which I had accidentally left on a nearby counter, buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. My hands shook as I opened it. The message read, "Your berry tart is exquisite, Hugo, but a tiny speck of raspberry seed has escaped onto the plate near the bottom left blueberry. Don't let it ruin the perfection. I know how much that dish means to you." My breath hitched in my throat. My entire body froze. I looked down at the plate I had just finished, and there it was, a minuscule, almost invisible speck of raspberry seed, just as she described near the bottom left blueberry. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. My stomach lurched. She wasn't just watching me from a distance or through hidden cameras. She was there. In the bustling, chaotic kitchen amidst my team, observing my every precise movement, seeing a detail that almost no one else would have noticed. My heart hammered, a frantic, desperate rhythm. The idea that someone could be so deeply entrenched in my professional space, watching my every action, even down to the most minute flaw, was a profound, unbearable horror. The kitchen, my sanctuary of creativity, felt utterly violated. I managed to correct the speck, my hands still shaken, and sent the plate out. After service, I immediately reported it to the event manager and then the police. They investigated, checking the venue's security footage, interviewing staff, but found nothing concrete. No sign of Arabella, no one suspicious. I was left alone with the chilling knowledge that she could infiltrate any space, observe any action, and find any flaw. I couldn't work in that kitchen again. The joy I once found in cooking, in the pursuit of culinary perfection, was now shadowed by a constant, chilling fear. Every time I plated a dish, I found myself compulsively checking for imperfections, imagining her unseen eyes critiquing my every move. I changed my catering company, moved to a different city, and became intensely private about my recipes and techniques. Years have passed since that terrifying incident, but the memory of Arabella's texts, especially the one about the raspberry seed, still haunts me. The violation of my professional and personal space, the utter collapse of my perceived privacy, lingers like a bitter aftertaste. I still wonder how she gained such deep, pervasive access. Was she a disgruntled former employee, a technologically gifted stalker, or simply a master of observation who found a perverse thrill in dissecting my culinary soul? I'll never know. All I know is that the horror followed me home, not just into my mind, but into the very core of my passion. It taught me that sometimes the person you think is a kindred spirit, sharing your deepest interests, can be the very person who turns your world into their private, chilling kitchen, leaving you with the unsettling knowledge that every ingredient, every technique, and every dish you create is being watched and judged by an unseen, terrifying critic. The trust I once had in the simple act of preparing food was irrevocably shattered. My name is Lenora Caldwell, and for the past 4 years, I've been a professional social media manager. My job is to craft online identities, curate digital presences, and build communities across various platforms. I spend my days navigating the intricate world of likes, shares, and followers, always aware of how carefully constructed an online persona can be. I thought I knew how to distinguish between a real person and a meticulously designed digital facade. I understood the power of an online image, both for good and for manipulation, but I never imagined that someone I met online would meticulously craft a persona so perfect, so tailored, that it would completely unravel my perception of reality, turning my expertise into my greatest vulnerability and ultimately threatening to erase my own digital self. It was a brisk Friday evening. I was home, trying to unwind after a demanding week of brand launches and content creation. I decided to swipe through one of the newer, trendier dating apps, hoping to find someone genuinely interesting, maybe even another digital native. That's when I matched with a guy named Jasper Langston. His profile was impeccable, professionally shot photos, a bio that was witty and engaging, and a perfectly curated aesthetic that screamed successful, creative, and adventurous. He claimed to be a freelance digital artist, specializing in AI-generated art, and his portfolio link showcased stunning, surreal pieces. It felt like an ideal match, almost too good to be true. Our initial messages were captivating. Jasper was articulate, insightful, and seemed to understand the nuances of the digital world even better than I did. We talked about algorithms, digital ethics, and the future of online identity. He casually mentioned, the latest AI model for deep fakes? It's so advanced, you can barely tell the difference from real footage. I've even seen some impressive work replicating facial microexpressions, a true testament to its power to create entirely new identities. My stomach gave a strange little lurch. Deepfakes and microexpressions were a very niche topic, something I only discussed in very specific, closed industry forums. It was a minor detail, but it felt incredibly specific, almost too much so, given the context. I brushed it off, thinking he was just incredibly well-informed. Or maybe it was a trending topic in his specific artistic circles. I rationalized it as a shared professional interest, not anything sinister. We made plans for our first date at a minimalist art gallery opening. Jasper was exactly as charming and intelligent in person as he was online. He spoke passionately about his art, about the merging of human creativity and AI, and his presence was utterly compelling. The date was brilliant, but the unsettling anomalies began to escalate almost immediately after. The very next day, I was in my home office creating content for a new client. I was working on a series of Instagram stories, carefully selecting filters and writing captions. My phone buzzed with a text from Jasper. It read, "Your story layout for the new cosmetic brand is looking sharp, Lenora. The warm filter really makes the product pop, but don't you think the call to action button could be a bit more vibrant to maximize engagement?" My heart hammered against my ribs. My stomach dropped. The specific client, the story layout, the warm filter, the call to action button, this was impossible. These were private, unshared drafts on my work laptop. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I immediately disconnected from the internet, my hands shaking, feeling a cold prickle on the back of my neck. How could he know these incredibly precise, real-time details of my private work? A few days later, the unease intensified into full-blown panic. I was recording a quick video for a personal Instagram reel, a casual outfit of the day. I was talking directly to the camera, explaining my fashion choices. Moments later, my phone buzzed again with a text from Jasper. "Loving the new sweater, Lenora. The olive green really complements your eyes. But when you say obsessed, remember to emphasize the S sound more for that playful effect. Just a thought for your content." My blood ran cold. The specific sweater, the color, my exact words, even the subtle vocal delivery I was using, this was private. I hadn't posted it yet. He wasn't just guessing. He was watching me through my own device, recording my private moments and critiquing my performance in real time. My heart pounded, a frantic, terrified drumbeat, echoing in the quiet of my apartment. I was utterly terrified. I immediately broke off all contact with Jasper, blocking him on every platform, changing passwords, and even physically covering my laptop camera and phone lens. But it was too late. The messages started coming from new, untraceable numbers and obscure corners of the web. They weren't threats, but chillingly precise critiques of my online presence, my personal choices, even my insecurities. Your latest profile picture is a bit too serious, Lenora. You usually have such a warm smile. Don't let your guard down. I noticed you didn't post your usual morning coffee shot today. Are you feeling all right? Consistency is key for your brand. He wasn't just watching. He was inside my digital identity, a ghost in my online machine, commenting on my every post, every interaction, every personal choice, rendering my digital self utterly transparent and controlled by his gaze. The true horror crashed down on me during a video call with my sister. We were catching up, laughing, sharing intimate family stories. My phone, which I thought I had secured, suddenly glitched. The screen briefly flickered, and then a familiar, distorted voice, unmistakably Jasper's, whispered from the speakers. "You know, Lenora, your sister's laugh is infectious, but I always preferred your old hairstyle. It was more authentic." My breath hitched in my throat. My entire body froze. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. My stomach lurched. He was in my video call. He was not just watching me. He had infiltrated my most private, personal communication, interjecting himself into my life, making his presence known. He could see and hear me and interact with my digital self. My heart hammered, a frantic, desperate rhythm. The idea that someone could have such complete, terrifying control over my digital identity, invading my conversations and commenting on my appearance, was a profound, unbearable horror. Every digital interaction, every online connection felt utterly compromised. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound, pulling the plug on my internet, throwing my phone across the room. I called the police, my voice a shaky mess, barely able to explain that my digital self had been utterly erased, controlled by a phantom. They listened, but without direct physical threats, they could do little more than advise me to change all my devices and seek professional cybersecurity help. I was left alone with the chilling knowledge that my online identity was no longer my own. I couldn't work for weeks. The very tools of my trade, social media, digital platforms, online communication, became sources of profound anxiety. I spent months rebuilding my digital security, deleting old accounts, creating entirely new online identities, and even considering a complete digital detox. The meticulously crafted online persona I once managed, both for clients and myself, felt like a broken mirror. Years have passed since that terrifying incident, but the memory of Jasper's whisper in my video call, his precise critique of my life, still haunts me. The violation of my digital self, the utter collapse of my perceived control over my own online identity, lingers like a virus in my system. I still wonder how he gained such deep, pervasive access. Was he a genius hacker, a vengeful former client, or simply someone who had found a perverse thrill in dissecting my digital soul? I'll never know. All I know is that the horror followed me home, not just into my mind, but into the very core of my understanding of identity and privacy in the digital age. It taught me that sometimes the person you swipe right on isn't looking for a connection. They're looking for a new canvas, turning your life into their terrifying digital art, leaving you with the unsettling knowledge that your online self, your very image, can be stolen and manipulated, leaving you with nothing but a hollow echo. These stories are chilling reminders that, in the quest for connection, we sometimes open doors to the unimaginable. The digital world is a vast, interconnected web, and while it offers incredible opportunities, it also harbors unseen shadows. The next time you swipe right, remember that some profiles hide not just a different person, but a completely different reality. Some matches aren't looking for love. They're looking for an entry point. And some digital connections are not meant to be found by individual minds, but by entirely different, terrifying intentions. Stay safe out there, and always trust your gut.